Moisture farming. Moisture farming is how most of Tatooine's locals survive, especially around the Lars homestead. Since Tatooine is a desert planet with barely any water, moisture farmers use vaporators, tall machines that suck water out of the air. It's not a glamorous life, but it's necessary. Owen Lars, the uncle of Luke Skywalker, ran one of these farms, and it's where Luke grew up before getting pulled into the rebellion. The farms are usually small and family-run, scattered across the Dune Sea or near Anchorhead. They harvest water, store it in underground tanks, and sell it to local settlements or traders. Because of the harsh climate and frequent Tusken Raider attacks, farmers have to be tough and usually carry blasters just in case. Moisture farming isn't just about survival. It actually fuels a small part of the planet's economy. Without it, places like Mos Eisley would struggle even more. Most farms also deal in bartering, trading water for supplies or spare parts from Jawas, who roam around in sandcrawlers. It's not high-profit work, and people like the Hutts or smugglers don't care about it much. But for everyday folk, it's life or death. And even though Luke Skywalker left it behind, that quiet farm life is still what kept him alive long enough to become a Jedi. Pod racing industry. Pod racing was one of the wildest parts of Tatooine's economy, especially during the time of the Galactic Republic. It's a deadly, high-speed sport where pilots race custom-built pods through dangerous desert tracks, like the infamous Bunta Eve Classic held in Mos Espa. This race alone brought in tons of gambling money, tourists, and shady business deals. The pod racing scene was mostly controlled by the Hutts, especially Jabba the Hutt, who used the races to make huge profits through betting. He even hosted the Bunta Eve race where young Anakin Skywalker made history by being the only human to ever win a pod race. Anakin's pod racing skills were insane, and it's one of the big reasons Qui-Gon Jinn believed he was force-sensitive. Building and maintaining pod racers also created jobs: mechanics, pit crews, droid operators, and engineers. Racers like Sebulba, a Dug who played dirty, were basically celebrities in the pod racing world. But it was all dangerous. Pilots died regularly, either from crashes or sabotage. Even though pod racing was eventually banned in most of the galaxy for being too dangerous, on Tatooine, it stuck around longer thanks to its lawless nature and the Hutt cartel's influence. It brought a ton of outside attention and credits to an otherwise poor planet. For a while, pod racing was the most exciting and profitable thing happening in the Outer Rim. Jawa salvage trade. Jawa salvage trade is a key part of Tatooine's economy. Jawas, the small, hooded creatures that travel in massive sandcrawler vehicles, are notorious for scavenging the desert for anything they can sell. They hunt for tech, mainly droids, like the ones left behind after battle, old ships, and other scraps from wrecked starships. These pieces are then cleaned up, refurbished, and sold to local settlers, traders, or even the occasional off-world buyer. They mostly deal in droids, which are extremely valuable on Tatooine because of their usefulness in a harsh environment. R2, D2, and C-3PO are perfect examples. They were captured by Jawas before they ever met Luke Skywalker. The Jawas sell these droids to families like the Lars and businesses in Mos Eisley, and some even go on to be sold as parts to bigger tech dealers. Jawas are also known for their unique barter system. They don't always accept credits as payment. They prefer goods like food or tools, which is why moisture farmers, for instance, end up dealing with them often. Their sandcrawlers are a mobile marketplace, and you'll find all kinds of junk, sometimes even valuable starship parts or weapons, though the Jawas aren't always clear about where their goods come from. Though the Jawas have a reputation for being sneaky and opportunistic, they play a major role in keeping the technology supply chain alive on Tatooine. Without their scavenging, many of the planet's settlements would be stuck without working droids or machinery. Slave trade. The slave trade is a dark, brutal part of Tatooine's economy. Tatooine, being a harsh desert planet with little law enforcement, became a prime place for the Hutt cartel to run illegal operations. One of the most lucrative and shameful of these was the trade of sentient beings, especially in the form of slaves. Jabba the Hutt was one of the biggest players in this, using slaves for everything from labor to entertainment. Slavery on Tatooine was widespread. Many of the planet's inhabitants, like Anakin Skywalker, were born into it. Anakin himself was a slave on the Lars homestead before Qui-Gon Jinn won him in a pod race, which started his path toward becoming a Jedi. Slaves were often treated as property, forced to work in the harsh environment for little or no pay, doing everything from manual labor to being used as gladiators in the Hutt's arenas. Some slaves, like Shmi Skywalker, lived their whole lives under the control of smugglers and criminals. While the Republic and Jedi Order condemned slavery, the remote Outer Rim territories like Tatooine were harder to police, allowing the practice to persist. Slaves were sometimes traded between powerful factions, like the Hutts, and sold to the highest bidder, often off-world, with little regard for their lives. The presence of slavery is one of the things that makes Tatooine such a morally gray place, where crime and oppression often take precedence over the law, and it shapes characters like Anakin Skywalker, who was shaped by his time as a slave. Bounty hunting. Bounty hunting is another significant part of Tatooine's economy, mainly because of the planet's lawlessness and criminal activity. The Hutts, who controlled much of Tatooine's underworld, often used bounty hunters to enforce their power, chase down fugitives, or recover debts. This made the planet a popular base of operations for bounty hunters like Boba Fett, one of the most famous bounty hunters in the galaxy, who was born on Kamino but spent much of his life working on planets like Tatooine. Bounty hunting isn't just a job, it's a whole subculture. Hunters take on contracts to capture or eliminate targets, and the job often leads them to places like Mos Eisley or the Dune Sea, where shady characters gather. For example, Boba Fett made a name for himself hunting down Han Solo, which ultimately led him to take Han to Jabba the Hutt. Bounty hunters work for the highest bidder, whether it's the Hutts, the Empire, or even private individuals. Many bounty hunters use Tatooine as a safe place to lay low, make deals, and stock up on gear. It's also a great spot to find new contracts, often tied to the criminal activities that flourish in the Outer Rim. But bounty hunters also deal with the dangers of the desert, including Tusken Raiders, the hostile environment, and the constant threat of being double-crossed. The bounty hunting business on Tatooine is all about survival and profit. With the planet's mix of crime and rebellion, bounty hunters play a critical role in the local economy, providing services to those who can afford them and making their way in a harsh, unforgiving galaxy. Cantina and hospitality services. Cantinas and hospitality services are a vital part of Tatooine's economy, serving as a meeting point for traders, smugglers, bounty hunters, and all kinds of travelers. The most famous of these is the Mos Eisley Cantina, where Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker had their first encounter with Han Solo and Chewbacca. The cantinas on Tatooine are notorious for their rough clientele and lawlessness, but they're also essential hubs for gathering information, making deals, and even finding work. In these cantinas, you'll find a variety of beverages, some exotic, some questionable, served to anyone who can pay. The cantinas also provide shelter from the brutal desert heat, making them more than just drinking spots. They offer food, rest, and sometimes a place to lay low for those running from the law. It's not all business. Entertainment is provided too, from musicians like Figrin Dan and the Modal Nodes, whose music became iconic after playing in the Mos Eisley Cantina, to the odd gambler or fighter showing off their skills. Tatooine's hospitality services are often run by locals or criminals. Owners, like Wuther at the Mos Eisley Cantina, might not care much for the law, but they know how to make a profit. These establishments can serve as neutral ground where people from all walks of life, be they lawmen, smugglers, or bounty hunters, can meet and strike deals. Even Luke Skywalker, in his early days, walked into these cantinas with no idea just how much his life was about to change. While the business might not be glamorous, the cantinas and other hospitality spots are a lifeline on a desert planet where finding comfort or connections can mean the difference between life and death.